Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is MickeyJo and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional theatre critic, creating video reviews of the shows I'm invited to see here on social media. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, and the app formerly known as Twitter. And today we are going to be talking all about the brand new West End musical based on the novel The Time Traveller's Wife, which is also called The Time Traveller's Wife, but the musical. This is currently playing at the Apollo Theatre in London's West End on Shaftesbury Avenue, and I was invited to see a press performance of the show last week. So today I'm going to let you know what the show is like, who is giving standout performances, and whether I thought this was a good musical adaptation or not. More to the point, in what is becoming a very crowded season for new musicals in the West End, does it stand out? Stay tuned throughout today's video review to find out, and if you enjoy this one, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for plenty more review content coming very soon about all your favourite West End and Broadway shows. And if you've already seen The Time Traveller's Wife, the musical, either since it started performances in the West End or during its out-of-town tryout last year in Chester, I believe, comment down below with what you thought of the show. For now, here is my video review of The Time Traveller's Wife right after this clip of the curtain call. So The Time Traveller's Wife is a 2003 science fiction / romance novel by Audrey Niffinger that was subsequently adapted both for film and for a TV series, which I'm given to understand deviates from the plot of the original novel. Having read through the synopsis, the musical's version of the story seems pretty consistent with the book, but I've heard things about other adaptations that are absolutely wild, such as Henry, the time-travelling character, visiting himself in the past and having romantic encounters with himself? Question mark, question mark, question mark? Needless to say, that does not happen in the show. Let me tell you what actually happens within the plot of the show. I'm going to give you kind of like a spoiler-free summary, but later in this review I probably will explore a little bit more spoiler-heavy content. So as the title suggests, this is a romantic story about a time traveller and his wife. Meet Henry and Claire. Now, he meets her canonically a lot when she's a child, so this actually makes sense. But in the show, we first encounter them both as adults when Claire encounters Henry in a library, and she is taken aback. She is thrilled to see him because she knows who he is. He's more than a little bit weirded out by this because he has no idea who this random woman is, but she knows him because she has already met him several times during her youth, and she already knows that he is a time traveller. He's like, oh my gosh. They go for dinner, whereupon he immediately abandons her because he has to abruptly time travel, and with seemingly no control over where he's going, he time travels back to meet young Claire for the first time. He meets her as a young girl. Now, an interesting and somewhat challenging aspect of this whole thing is that every time Henry time travels, he loses everything upon his person, including his clothing. So he arrives wherever and whenever naked. Now, this detail is important because it's so tethered to the romance and tragedy of him not being able to take anything with him, whether that's people or children or possessions, but it also presents a little bit of a challenge for the show and creates a slightly uncomfortable situation where he keeps travelling back to go and meet this young girl, but every time he arrives, he's naked. It also presents a little bit of a staging challenge, but we'll get to that. So Henry appears to Claire at various points throughout her young life, and we see her growing up through his eyes. He beats up a classmate of hers at a party who tries to take advantage of her. He spends Christmas with her on one occasion, and she becomes so enamored with him that by the time she meets him in real time, she's very excited about it. Then, as promised by the title and some details that he accidentally lets slip, they go on to pursue a relationship, where they navigate all of the usual challenges that couples have to deal with the added bonus of a little bit of time travel complication. They don't have enough money, but this is resolved by the fact that he can find out what the winning lottery numbers are going to be. They're trying to have their first child and start a family, but he's inadvertently passing on genetic traits that allow the embryos to time travel out of pregnant Claire. Now, I don't know if this checks out scientifically, I'll be perfectly honest, but you get the idea about what the rest of the show is. We have these other supporting characters as well, because we learn a little bit more about Henry's backstory. On one of the earliest occasions when he time traveled, it was during a traffic accident that killed his mother. This is something he still carries with him. Prior to meeting Claire, in fact, he would always time travel to go back and see his mother. His father, who knows he's a time traveler, is evidently not over this whatsoever. And we also have Charisse and Gomez, two high school friends of Claire's who continue to be present in her adult life. And honestly, that's kind of the extent of the plot with these two. The cleverness and the intrigue of it comes from Henry appearing in a non-linear way. Mostly when Henry is appearing to Claire, he's coming from a different time and she's having to work out the context of their relationship to him, as well as the looming threat of knowing too much about your own future. Needless to say, it's a little bit of a complex timeline and narrative, so let's talk about how well that is explored within the show's material. So I want to talk mainly just about the storytelling here and how they address the time-travelling aspect of all of it. And then I'll tell you a little bit later what I really think of the show and give you the star rating. Now again, I have not read this book, apologies, but from what I can tell, it seems to follow a similar structure in terms of the narrative. Now when I went to the press launch of this show, I spoke to Joss Stone and Dave Stewart, the composing team, who are well known within the music industry, and they spoke about wanting to articulate this story from Claire's perspective, which I think is really important. It is, after all, called The Time Traveler's Wife, and not the time traveller. So we really ought to see this through Claire's eyes. However, the first thing we see is them meeting in this library and her being very excited because she already knows him. So arguably we're getting the story from Henry's timeline. Except it's a half-baked version of his timeline, because if we were to get his full story, it ought to start with his childhood, and we ought to know about him to begin with. Instead, we have this moment from Claire's later life, and then we see her youth through his eyes. In fact, for the duration of the first act, we're really just experiencing her in reaction to him. Henry is given the agency, we move as he does, and we just see Claire responding to him as a character. It's not until the second act that she develops a little bit more of her own voice, which is very welcome. I just think that she could have a little bit more independence throughout. That's not to say we can't see her falling in love with him and being enamored with him, we just don't get a chance for her to really articulate her own feelings independently in that first act. And playing with time is a very difficult thing to do in musical theatre. When you think of the shows that have a little bit of an abstract timeline, something like A Last 5 Years, where we have two storylines about a relationship, one progressing forwards, one going in reverse, it's very clear what's happening throughout. Then something like A Merrily We Roll Along, a story that is told entirely in reverse. We get a lot of clarity each time we're moving backwards in time, because we have these transitional moments, and then we have big indicators that update us on where those characters are and what year it is. It is made especially clear to us. The issue that we have in The Time Traveler's Wife during the first act is we get these different scenes from Claire's childhood, and I think it's just difficult to portray on stage versus on screen exactly where we are in that story and exactly where Henry has come from. How old is he at this moment? Is this an older Henry than the Henry she met the last time? How many times has he met her? Is he already married to her in the future? Has he just met her at the Thai restaurant in the future? What is she to him? What is he to her? There's one particularly puzzling scene that we see after a high school party moment, I think we see it after, where he comes to her on Christmas, and it's not especially clear whether she's older than the high school party, whether we're progressing forwards or whether we're just going back to an even earlier time. He's coming in very grumpy and we don't know why. That's never really quite fully explored, or if it was, I missed that in all of the confusion of the timeline jumping. At particularly pivotal moments, there were projections that were very profound that told you what the significance of this moment was, like the first time Henry meets Claire, and so on and so forth. But I think it would have been helpful in terms of the storytelling if there had been more clarity at each individual time jump. I don't know how exactly you present that, whether the structure of the thing just needed to be more obvious so you don't need to provide the clarity, because the problem is, if it's unclear what they mean to each other in each instance and how old he is and how much of their relationship he has already had, the problem that presents is you spend the first 10 seconds of every scene trying to work it out, and you're not emotionally engaged with the thing, and you're not particularly paying attention to the dialogue either, because you're just trying to place it. I would describe the sensation of watching those moments of this show as being shown a great work of art, but it's being handed to you in individual puzzle pieces that you have to put together for yourself. It's not quite as satisfying. It is if you can put the whole thing together, but the show doesn't give you the tools to put the puzzle pieces together. I've become lost in this metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. So as well as more clarity in terms of the time periods we're actually looking at, I think this show would have benefited from deviating further from that original source material. Again, from what I have heard about other adaptations, they have stood slightly further apart from scenes originally written in the novel. I think this had the possibility to explore more interesting things. This is a stage adaptation. It doesn't have all of the tools that a screen adaptation does in being able to show really subtle and specific aging. What we have instead is a bunch of costume changes, loudly period accurate wardrobes, and slightly different wigs. Instead, this ought to rely on the tools that it does have at its fingertips, which is the emotional immediacy of a live theatre production. I think there are moments that we could have explored more fully that we didn't. Now, you might be curious at this point, the way that the time traveling is actually portrayed on stage, more often than not, David Hunter will run behind a set piece, occasionally disappear into something and be concealed by other things, or jump out of something to make it seem like he's magically appearing, and these are quite effective illusions. They do use doubles on occasion, which answered the question that had been occurring to me in the first act, where I was starting to think, wow, some of those ensemble members look very similar. Incidentally, I'm fascinated as to whether the casting call was literally, how much do you look like David Hunter from behind? But the set has a central revolve which can portray different scenes on two sides and different screens at the side. Now, he runs behind these screens and there's a little bit of a projection effect, and then he emerges from a different place naked, basically. If that alarms anyone, he's not literally naked on stage and you don't actually see anything. It is just heavily implied. I mean, you don't see nothing. I'm not going to dwell on this. We're going to move on. I feel like I'm just beginning to tell you what I thought of the show. So let's just say that. Let's talk about what I thought of this show. So I'm sort of sad to say, because I thought this had a lot of promise, and I still do think it has a lot of promise, that this is a 3-star show. And it's not because of its script, it's not because of its score. I think it's a decent score, I think it's a decent script, I think it's a decent story, and it's full of great performances. I don't hate the set, I think it's well designed, I think it's well staged. So what isn't connecting here? The problem for me, I think, is all in how they have adapted this story. That problem that I mentioned before, that I wanted to tell you about before I even got to this section. It's stopping us becoming properly emotionally invested in this story. There's also a little bit of ickiness that they have to sidestep around. They've done a great job of not making it feel uncomfortable. In the story, he visits her throughout her childhood, and then like the second she turns 18 is when they then consummate their relationship. That does not happen in the context of the show. The only romantic encounter that we see in the show happens after they are married. Technically, but it's fine. It's funny, even. The problem is that the confusion of these timelines really just inhibits our emotional investment in these characters. The words have more weight and the encounters have more weight if you understand the significance of each of them. You have no idea, for most of it, who Claire is to Henry each time he is seeing her. And then when you do, sometimes it doesn't make sense. So take their wedding, for instance. They are getting ready to get married when Henry promptly and beyond his control teleports and time travels to a different time. Claire starts understandably panicking because this is like the absolute worst case scenario. You're being not only left at the altar, but fully left in this time period and abandoned by your time traveling husband. However, another Henry appears from the future wearing the same outfit, but with little grey temples which tell us that he is older. In fact, he is Henry 9 years from now. Claire is a little bit taken aback by this, but being a practical gal, she thinks they should just get married regardless as soon as possible. And he is too busy being in love with her and saying, I forgot how beautiful you looked. Now, this is where I have a problem, and someone can correct me if I've got this completely wrong in the comments, but we saw her putting on her dress with Charisse. We saw him in a different room with Gomez getting nervous about the wedding before he time traveled. He never saw her in that dress in his past. So when older Henry is saying, I forgot how beautiful you looked, his only reference point for that could have been photographs, basically, because he has not had a chance as a character, as far as we see for the rest of this wedding sequence, to actually see her with his own eyes in her wedding dress, unless it's implied that he time travelled away and the other one came back later, but we're not told that. That for me is a time travel plot hole, and the kind of little detail that I ought not to scrutinise, but I'm absolutely not going to let go. Now, I told you I like the script, and I do. There's an awful lot of character in the script. We know exactly who Charisse is, who Gomez is. They are funny. They have so much character. They are vibrant. We know who Claire is. She gains this assertive independence in the second act. She's very funny. They have a charming relationship. You absolutely believe the love between these two and the chemistry of these two individuals, not just because of the great performers who are doing a wonderful job, but because of the writing. And the music is really great. I like this score. I think it's soulful and I think it's powerful. Joss Stone and Dave Stewart have done a great job here. Before I move on, Lauren Gunderson has written the book, and there's also additional music credited to Nick Finlow and additional lyrics credited to Kate Kerrigan. But back to these songs. Songs like Journeyman, really strong, really powerful, and angsty and rocky and edgy, and he's singing about how it feels like he's being torn apart every time he time travels to a new place. The problem is, this comes with almost no theatrical potency because it happens in the context of a very calm scene with younger Claire. She's asking him what it feels like when he time travels, and so he sings this song. Not to her because she leaves the stage, he sings it as a monologue out of nowhere. If he were to sing this at an emotionally powerful moment in the show and the dialogue were to give way to this song, then it would have twice as much impact at least. And very traumatizing and dramatic things happen to him later in the show while he is time traveling. If he were to be empowered with this number at the right time and not as an Act 2 opener, then it would be better. I also have issues with the way that this number is staged. So Bill Buckhurst has directed, and for the most part I think he's done a wonderful job. He exposes all of the emotional beats very, very well. My issue is with Journeyman. They bring a gauze curtain down in front of it, they have some terrific projections, but they bring on ensemble members and doubles so that he can appear in different places, and the ensemble members are wearing morph suits with their faces exposed. Enough for us to see these fleshy faces around him doing physical theatre. And if you can't completely hide the physical theatre, you need to just lean into it and show the physical theatre. The problem is, there's no physical theatre throughout the rest of this show. It's naturalistic. We obscure him completely when he disappears and reappears. There's a moment where he's in Claire's basement and she has to run towards him with a blanket like she's a child on Halloween pretending she's a vampire to obscure him disappearing into something. I'm pretty sure he hides in a hot dog cart at one point so he can appear naked next to a homeless woman on a bench. But after all of that, after going to the trouble to make everything seem so real, you can't have the ensemble members with the visible faces not really achieving that much either. They just like lean him back, and at one point he's astride someone's lap and they're sitting, but it does lose the emotional impact of this song when he's trying to get into it and be angsty and he's like leant over someone and you just see them sitting forward face on to the audience just like this. I did try and stifle a laugh at that point because it just looks comical. Ultimately, it's the lack of a marriage between the book and the songs that I think are causing issues for this show. You have beautiful songs that don't necessarily come in the right place, so we don't necessarily walk up to them in the right way with this script. Everything is working separately, but it doesn't work cohesively. Not for me, at least. Not to provide the necessary emotional impact. The individual elements are moving and stirring and charming and funny and witty, but they don't have the combined power that they ought to because they're not being combined in the right way. And again, that is not to say I didn't enjoy the show, because there is so much great material in there, particularly around individuals' performances. So let me tell you more things that I like about this production and its writing while telling you what I thought of the cast. So let's first of all talk about David Hunter, who is playing Henry. I think he's terrific in this role. I think he has all of the requisite charm. It's great getting to see him explore a little bit more angst. He was so perfect as Dr. Pomatter in Waitress, but he has always had this rocky, edgy, angsty tone to his voice. I remember him from Superstar, the Jesus Christ Superstar casting show on ITV, and that slightly goofy, lovable, endearing quality that made him not quite right for the seriousness and the gravitas of playing Jesus makes him perfect for Henry. I want there to be more material exploring the fatherhood idea, because as I was watching it and as I was watching his beautiful performance around those scenes and the scenes with his daughter, it was occurring to me, I don't think there's enough material within the musical theatre oeuvre really exploring fatherhood. And especially given the precariousness of his parental position, that would be very interesting. But all of the stuff with his father is so well played. The scenes with Claire are so well played. The way that he's taken aback but then warms to her, him getting to know her as a child, I still think it's a little bit weird, but it's also charming. I do think that the show generally would benefit from another actor playing young Henry, just as there is a young performer playing young Claire, because we talk so much about things that happened during his childhood and how formative those memories and those experiences were. I think we ought to see that from the young Henry perspective. I feel like that might be what's missing here. Now, if we already knew what to expect with David Hunter's performance, Joanna Woodward opposite him is a little bit of a revelation here. She's been in a decent amount of shows, but this is one of her first real principal roles in the West End. My God, is it earned. She is fantastic in this show. She is feisty and empowered. Her voice is gorgeous. It has this soulful quality that so well aligns with the Joss Stone of this score. When she's singing that first song, My Masterpiece, I'm still not convinced that the lyrics of that moment really articulate properly what she's experiencing at that time, rather than just being this sort of needlessly poetic comparison of the art that she does as an artist with the emotional position that she's in at that moment, having just seen Henry again. But her singing of it, beautiful, my goodness. And the two of them together are also wonderful. From what it seems, she has to do a little bit more age transformation in the show. Those younger scenes are played very believably, and the frustration and ultimately grief that she experiences as she continues through the show are also heartbreakingly well done. Joanna Woodward, fantastic in this show, so is David. Now, among the supporting performances, Ross Dawes is someone I think does a terrific job. He is playing Henry's enduringly resentful father, who blames his son and his mysterious time-travelling abilities for the death of his beloved late wife. Their brief scene together is one of my favourites in the show. I like what little we get to see of his father's arc. I think that is really well written and quite well developed. Again, I think it would be more powerful if we were to ground it in an understanding of who he is in the past. We have this one brief scene where Henry goes back to tell his mother, who doesn't realise who it is that she's talking to, that he has just met a girl who he loves, basically. And he speaks with his mother on that occasion. He doesn't really speak with his father. I think we need to understand what their relationship is from an earlier point, or we need to see more of their relationship in the past. Again, if we had a young Henry, if we had more context for all of this, if his mother and father were both more present in the show. Sorrel Marsh plays his mother in this brief moment and then returns to the ensemble, basically, because his mother is not much of a fixture in the show. We're told that she is a singer, and he talks about the feeling of hearing her sing and getting to watch her performances. That would carry so much more weight if, you guessed it, we heard her sing more in the show, if we got to see more of that. Now, it's tricky because by the time that Henry starts time traveling to go and see Claire, that's when he stops time traveling to go and see his mother. So because we're only seeing this part of his story and not this part or this part, though we're told what happens before and after, it sort of precludes us from being able to explore the more interesting meaty stuff around his relationship with his parents. But that's so important for his character. I wish that we had time to do more of that, and I wish we got Sorrel Marsh singing something as Henry's mother. Then you have Hiba Elchikhe and Tim Mahendran as Claire's friends from high school, Charisse and Gomez, who we also meet as a couple. Now, whoever is designing the costumes had, I think, the most fun with Hiba Elchikhe. We should mention not only the costume designer, but the entire wardrobe team, because the quick changes that David Hunter has to do in this show, it's already been spoken about a lot on social media, but I believe he has 29 different costumes. I could not imagine changing my clothes that many times that quickly. I mean, that sounds exhausting. But shout out to, I'm going to tell you every costume name I can find here in this program. Literally, why can't I find one? Where is the costume designer? I did notice that one of the coats that someone was wearing during an art gallery scene, I was like, oh, I've seen that coat on like a targeted Instagram ad for ASOS. Costume supervisor and costume design assistant was Ilona Karos. I mean, great work for you. Dresser, Julia Palala. Principal dresser, Bryony Chandler. Wardrobe assistant, Jeremiah Whitaker. Wardrobe deputy, Corey Darling. Head of wardrobe, Charlotte Stidwell. Associate designers, Kat Fuller and Pip Terry. I literally cannot tell you. Deputy costume supervisor, Carolina Job. Who sourced the crazy dresses that Hiba wears? Oh, production designer and additional illustrations, Anna Fleischl. There you go, that's a name that I recognise. We got there in the end. Now, Hiba and Tim bring a lot of levity. They have an abundance of charm between them. Tim is initially super standoffish and not receptive to the idea of Claire having a boyfriend. I think it would be nice if we'd had just a few more lines of dialogue, even with them as younger characters, to really cement the nature of their relationship, because we're on slightly murky ground as to whether Tim's character of Gomez has enduring romantic feelings for Claire, or whether he wanted to ask out Charisse before Charisse basically backed him into a corner with a romantic proposition. It's not clear, and so that sort of slightly taints the way that he acts towards Henry when he meets him in later life. The other thing is, neither of them, but more particularly Charisse, feel like they quite have adequate depth. Charisse feels like a little bit of a cartoon alongside him, where she finds out about the whole time travel thing and then she's like, time travel? Oh my gosh. They sing this song in the second act called A Woman's Intuition, the highlight of which is Alexander Lodge in the ensemble playing clearly a gay guy at this art gallery who is checking out Henry at one point. I did catch that at the back of the stage. Excellent work from him. And though they both sing it beautifully, they're wonderful vocalists and they're fantastic performers, I just don't know that that song is completely necessary. It's a long walk up to the argument that Henry and Claire are about to have, and it just feels like, oh, we need to give Charisse and Gomez another song. If they were to sing about something in their own relationship that unknowingly parallels something that's happening in Henry and Claire's, maybe during a montage sequence about how, like, marriage changes as you get older and we could see various different times, that might be more interesting. I generally think, and this is a very late note from me that goes back to an earlier section, but I think there are more interesting things you could explore with the concept just of a normal marriage between a woman who is stuck in traditional time and a man who keeps unwittingly abandoning her to go and time travel to these other places and times. I think there is more that you could say about that and how that shapes and informs their relationship. We get to see glimpses of it. I just want fuller conversations around those ideas. But basically, and though there is so much more that I could say about this show, and maybe I will in another video, those have been my thoughts about The Time Traveler's Wife, the musical at the Apollo Theatre. I think it's emotional. I think it's a decent enough date night show. You know, there are moments that are going to make you feel things. It is affecting. It's a great opportunity to reflect on, like, people in your own life and relationships with parents. And if you are a parent, then there's a lot for you to connect to in this show as well. I just think for all of that, there's also so much more that it could be exploring, and a little bit more focus and clarity around some of the time travel aspects would go, I think, an awfully long way. But the material itself, I enjoy on paper. One last thing, because it's just occurring to me, there is a song that they sing right at the end, the last thing they sing before you're going to leave the theatre, and it's another one of these slightly generic, like, message songs that you have at the end of a musical. They do it in Doubtfire, and this one is Love Wins the Day, and this is just the message they're coming out with, but it doesn't really come from anywhere. You don't understand who's singing this song, whether these are the characters or if this is just the ensemble who don't really get to say or sing much throughout the show, but are necessary for making scenes look busier. It feels a little more like a last-ditch attempt to try and tug on some heartstrings, and certainly there are moments in the show where they effectively do that, but there are a lot of other missed opportunities, I think. Is this going to stand out amongst all of the other new musicals coming in this season, with something like Hadestown that is going to be opening up next door at the Lyric Theatre, with shows like The Little Big Things, with others opening in the next few months that we don't even know about? I'm not sure whether this is quite going to be strong enough to secure an Olivier nomination for Best New Musical, not in this crowded a season. But we will have to wait and see. For now, those have been my thoughts about The Time Traveler's Wife. Like I said before, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. There are many more reviews coming soon. There are lots of new shows opening. Like I said, stay tuned for my thoughts on all of those. And if you have seen The Time Traveler's Wife already, comment down below with what you thought of this show, especially if you disagreed with any of my thoughts in this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!